can still hear the song they played at their wedding reception. That old sappy ballad my father called the perfect song for a perfect couple. But that night, at their 30th anniversary party, as I stood alone near the grand ballroom entrance, it felt less like a song and more like a ghost. The scent of gardenias and expensive perfume hung heavy in the air, a familiar opulence that I never felt was truly mine. Even when the laughter echoing across the room belonged to my own family, I watched them raise their glasses to my younger sister, Serena, the golden child. Her smile, the kind of effortless perfection my parents had spent their lives cultivating. I saw my father, Robert, lean in to whisper something to a colleague, a low chuckle rippling through the crowd as he glanced my way, then turned back, his gaze passing right over me. It was that kind of night, the kind where you are physically present but emotionally invisible, and the silence felt louder than any music. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. Alara Rhodes stepped into the Virginia Country Club ballroom, the familiar scent of gardenias and polished mahogany washing over her, a scent that smelled of money and a family she had long felt like an outsider to. The valet hadn't even looked up when he took her keys. A wave of laughter rippled through the space, a symphony of joy and celebration. But it felt like a sound from a different planet. My parents were near the front, standing beside a colossal ice sculpture of a swan, their faces glowing under the warm light as they held court. Surrounded by a crowd of polished smiles, my younger sister, Serena, stood beside them, a vision in a shimmering silver gown, her arm linked with her new fiancé, a man named Gavin, who was a rising star in the tech world. He was handsome in the way men from glossy magazines are, all chiseled jaw and easy confidence, the perfect accessory to her perfect life. I hadn't seen them in over a year. Not since the last Christmas when I'd flown in for a day and left after a tense dinner where my father, Robert, had spent most of the time talking about Serena's latest venture. He hadn't even bothered to ask about my work, the one I had dedicated my entire adult life to, the one that kept me up at all hours of the night in a bunker buried deep beneath the earth. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin and sharp in my lungs. My mother, Evelyn, caught sight of me over the heads of two women in elegant hats. Her smile, which had been bright enough to light up the room, dimmed a fraction. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and turned back to her conversation. My father turned then, his eyes landing on me for a brief fleeting moment before they scanned the crowd again, searching for someone more interesting, someone with a more impressive title. No hug, no. "We're so glad you came." He simply gave a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes and returned to his conversation about the latest stock market trends. The sting was a familiar one, a low ache I'd carried with me since I was a child. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. I was a ghost in my own family's story, a footnote that no one bothered to read. I wandered over to the empty bar and ordered a glass of water, watching the scene unfold from a distance, just as I'd always done. I was technically their daughter, but in that moment, in that ballroom full of people who had known me my entire life, I felt like a stranger crashing a private event. The bartender, a young man with a tired expression, barely glanced at me as he slid the glass across the counter. The laughter rolled on like a tide, washing over me but never touching me. I found an empty table near the exit, tucked away in a quiet corner, the seat cushions sunken, the centerpiece a little off-kilter. It was the kind of table you put the people you didn't quite know where to put, the kind of table you put the forgotten. It was the kind of table I belonged at. I sat there, tracing the faded pattern on the tablecloth with my finger, feeling the weight of the years, the weight of their deliberate forgetting. They didn't just forget me, they actively erased me. My non-traditional employment was 4 combat deployments and 2 intelligence commendations, but to them it was a stain, a liability to their image. Melissa cleared her throat. "There's more." She swiped again. An email to the Medal of Honor nomination board for my mother. Anna Dorsey has expressed her wish for privacy and anonymity. Please withdraw her nomination. I never wrote that. I never asked for that. They didn't just ignore my accomplishments, they stole them. I leaned back in my seat, the room spinning slightly. The DJ announced something cheerful. People clapped, toasted. A new slideshow flickered across the screen. Baby photos, prom night, graduations. No image of me. I bit the inside of my cheek. I remembered being 17, telling my parents I'd accepted West Point. My dad said nothing for a full minute. Then, "So, you're choosing the barracks over the Ivy League," I said. "I'm choosing purpose." He shook his head and left the room. That's what they'd been doing ever since. Leaving the room every time I showed up, every time I accomplished something. And now this. I looked at Melissa. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I know some of you reading this are probably sitting there, fists clenched, thinking, they did what? Yeah, same. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just signs an email and hits send. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. Right now. All I felt was that numb kind of ache, the one that whispers, "You were never really theirs." And for the first time in years, I started believing it. Dinner had barely started when the first toast came. The MC, an old theater kid turned real estate guy with a mic, raised his glass and said, "Here's to the brightest stars of 2003. Some of us went corporate, some went creative. And hey, did anyone here become a general?" Laughter. Light, playful, just enough to sting if it hit the wrong spot. My father leaned back in his chair near the front. Without even glancing toward me, he quipped loud enough to carry, "If my daughter's a general, then I'm a ballerina." People chuckled. Someone from the table added, "Didn't she join the military for a semester or something, or was it a summer program?" My mother sipped her wine and said with that familiar icy tone, "She's always had a flair for dramatics, probably still on some base peeling potatoes." That one landed. The table howled. Even the DJ cracked a smile. And I sat there, table 14 by the exit, facing a room of people who once passed me notes in biology and borrowed my debate outlines. No one turned to correct them. No one said, "Actually, she led missions you'll never read about." No one stood. Even Melissa didn't know what to do. She looked over at me from 2 tables away, but couldn't meet my eyes for long. The laughter rolled on, and I sat still and small. It wasn't just that they laughed at me. It was the ease, the comfort with which they erased my story like it had no edges. I kept my face still, my hands in my lap, my mouth closed, because that's what I was trained to do. Stay steady under pressure, even when the bomb wasn't a missile. But a joke from your own father. The slideshow started next. Photos from prom, homecoming, college move-ins, Harvard, no Anna, no photos, no record. Like I'd never existed. And when my name did appear on a group photo from Model UN, someone behind me muttered, "Didn't she drop out right after that?" I stared at the screen. My face was barely visible, back row slightly blurred. I remember that day. I gave the final speech. But they zoomed on Bryce in the corner wearing a blazer 2 sizes too big. He hadn't even spoken. That was the moment it sank in. I'd been written out, not just forgotten, not misplaced, rewritten. My parents had done it with such care, such consistency, like scrubbing a stain from the family name. And the worst part? It worked. No one in that room knew who I was anymore. And worse, none of them cared to ask. The night air hit different once I stepped out onto the balcony. Inside, they were cutting the reunion cake. My mother had a champagne flute in hand. My father was mid-laugh. And my brother was surrounded by a circle of Ivy League smiles. From out here, it all looked like a movie I'd been edited out of. I didn't cry. I was past crying, somewhere over the years. I'd traded tears for stillness, that quiet you build when the people you love teach you how to live without their approval. My phone vibrated against my palm. No name, just a secure notification. Merlin status updated. Threat level 3 increasing, requesting eyes. I stepped back inside my suite, closed the door, drew the curtains. Then I opened the black case I'd hidden under my hanging dress. It required fingerprint, voice, and retinal ID to unlock. The interface booted with a soft chime. The hum of classified intel filled the silence like an old familiar hymn. I scanned the real-time threat board. Merlin wasn't just theoretical anymore. A live breach had occurred. Multi-vector international implications embedded signal traces inside a NATO archive. It wasn't just noise. It was war in code, and they needed me still. While my family toasted to the people I never became, Harvard alumni, bride, Wall Street advisor, somewhere across the world, a cyber unit was waiting for my instructions. I sat at the edge of the bed and took off my heels. Then I reached under the false panel of my suitcase and unfolded the uniform. Dress blues, polished bars, single silver star. I didn't put it on. Not yet. Instead, I stared at it. I thought about that Medal of Honor nomination, the one my mother shut down with a fabricated email. How easy it had been for her to say I didn't want it. Because I never made noise. Because I didn't ask to be seen. Silence had protected me for years. But it had also made me invisible. And tonight, after watching them laugh, erase me, rewrite the narrative in real time, silence no longer felt like a shield. It felt like consent. I stood up, walked back to the window. The ballroom below glittered through the glass. Everyone was so sure of their roles, so confident in the story they'd built without me. But the truth, I'd been running operations larger than anyone in that room could imagine. And I was still the fulcrum, the pivot no one saw coming. My phone pinged again. Encrypted voice message. Colonel Ellison's voice low and sharp. Ma'am, requesting extraction window. Merlin escalation confirmed. Pentagon needs your presence in DC by 0600. I didn't hesitate. Confirmed. I replied. The world still called for me, even if my family never would. And in that moment, something inside me settled. Not peace, just clarity. They didn't need to know who I was, but they were about to find out. The music had just shifted into something jazzy when the MC grabbed the mic again. And now, he grinned. Our final toast, Mr. and Mrs. Dorsey, proud parents of Bryce Dorsey, Harvard grad and rising star in venture capital. People clapped. My mother stood with both arms stretched out like she was accepting an Oscar. My father raised his glass like a general on the battlefield. And Bryce, he flashed the kind of smile you only learn after being told your whole life you were the golden one. And, of course, the MC added, chuckling, shout out to the Dorsey family's other child, wherever she ended up. Laughter rippled across the room like static. Then it hit a sound. Low, rumbling, sharp. The chandeliers trembled, napkins fluttered, glasses clinked against each other. Outside the grand ballroom, the sky cracked open with the whump-whump of helicopter blades. It wasn't subtle. Lights from the windows flickered as a matte black military chopper descended over the lawn. Stealth-painted floodlights flaring, rotors churning the air like a storm. Guests spilled toward the glass doors, phones already raised, voices tumbling into confused panic. My father furrowed his brow. What in the world? The front doors blew open with wind and noise as two figures emerged, uniforms pressed, boots striking the marble floor with sharp synchronized steps. One of them was Colonel Ellison. He scanned the room like a missile-locking target. And then he saw me. He walked straight past the CEOs, the senators, the golden tables at the front, stopped 3 feet from me, chest squared, then he saluted. Lieutenant General Dorsey, ma'am, the Pentagon requires your immediate presence. The room froze. Chairs stopped creaking, forks hung midair. My mother's smile slid from her face like melting wax. My father's wine glass tilted in his hand. Loot? What? Someone whispered. Ellison didn't flinch. Ma'am, intel confirms active movement on Merlin. Immediate extraction authorized. I nodded once. Across the room, the MC lowered his mic. The DJ didn't touch the music. Bryce sat slack-jawed, blinking like he was buffering. Then came the moment I'll never forget. A reporter invited to cover the reunion stepped forward with a trembling sheet of paper. I've just received this, she said. An internal leak from the Jefferson High Board. An email from the Dorseys in 2010 requesting the removal of General Dorsey's name from the alumni wall to avoid confusion over their family legacy. A gasp, one that felt like it sucked all the air from the room. I turned to face my parents, my voice steady. "You didn't just reject me. You tried to erase me." My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father stepped forward. "Anna, we know. You don't get to speak now." I turned to Ellison. "Let's go." He handed me the classified folder. "Chopper's ready, ma'am." I walked past my mother, past my father's stunned silence, past Bryce's broken stare, past the table I was never meant to sit at. As I stepped into the cool night air, wind whipping my hair, I could hear the whispers building behind me. "She's a general." Wait, that's the daughter. They lied about her. Why would her own parents let them wonder? Some truths don't need a microphone, just a moment loud enough to shake the sky. The Medal of Honor didn't feel heavy around my neck, not like silence did, not like 2 decades of being erased by the people who were supposed to know me best. The South Lawn was full that morning. Press, cadetses, military brass, senators. Even the president looked humbled as he read the citation for acts of service beyond visibility for protecting not only the mission, but the dignity of the invisible. When he placed the ribbon around my neck, I didn't smile. I stood straight, shoulders back like I always had, because this wasn't about recognition. It was about truth. Somewhere in the third row, my mother sat with perfect posture, pearl earrings glinting in the sun. My father stared straight ahead. I didn't look their way. They didn't cry. They didn't clap. But Melissa did. And so did Colonel Ellison, standing just behind the cameras, his chin lifted with pride. Later that day, I visited the new wall at Jefferson High, the Hall of Legacy. My name had been restored, not in gold, not in marble, just a clean bronze plaque with simple words. Anna Dorsey, led in silence, served without needing to be seen. A few cadets gathered nearby, whispering. One of them approached, young, freckles, about the age I was when I left for West Point. "Ma'am," she said, voice shaking, "you're the reason I enlisted." I nodded once. That was enough. I don't know if my parents stayed to see the plaque. I don't need to know. That's the thing about being abandoned. Once you stop trying to be welcome back, you get to choose what you carry forward and what you finally lay down. If you've ever felt erased by your own family, by people who are supposed to love you, drop a 1 in the comments. If you made it out stronger, even in silence, drop a 2. Not for the algorithm, not for attention, just so others like us know we're not alone. Not anymore. The next part of my life began that night, on a golf course bathed in the blinding light of a search and rescue helicopter. The crew didn't speak as I was ushered inside, the roar of the rotors a constant, thrumming presence that felt more calming than the silence of the ballroom I had just left. The flight was short, a blur of city lights and dark farmland, and by the time we landed on a rooftop helipad, I was a different person. I wasn't Alara Rhodes, the invisible daughter, the quiet one. I was something else entirely, something they would never understand. I was escorted into a sterile white room filled with monitors blinking with lines of code. The air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the humid ballroom, my new reality, my real reality. I was handed a steaming cup of coffee and a tablet. The screen displayed a global threat map, a web of red lines and blinking cursors. And I knew exactly what they meant. A new war, a silent one, had begun. And I was on the front lines, exactly where I belonged. I was no longer a ghost. I was a weapon. And my family would soon find out just how powerful a weapon I had become.